Hello and welcome to this episode of Inside the Piranha Club with me, Rebecca Clancy.
And me, Ben Hunt.
And me, Mark Van Bryans.
And we will be taking a look back at the Japanese Grand Prix where Kimi Antonelli was a victor again, back-to-back wins for the 19-year-old, and he becomes the youngest ever driver to lead the World Championship. Was there a more irrelevant statistic? I do wonder. But anyway, he is leading it after 3 races and still 650 to go. 9 points ahead of his Mercedes teammate, George Russell. Ben, let's start on a positive because I want to. Kimi Antonelli was actually not great at the start of the race, I would say. He very much lucked into this victory. But actually, when he got the lead, he held on to it. He handled the pressure. But we know about Kimi Antonelli, don't we? In the sense that Mercedes have picked him up as a generational talent. He was, dare I say, slightly underwhelming in his rookie year, but I think he can be forgiven for that because most people are in their rookie year. Not everyone is Lewis Hamilton. But Ben, do you think we are now seeing the Kimi Antonelli that Mercedes have been going on about for all of these years?
Yeah, I think we are. We're actually seeing a young man who... I think that statistic is important, actually, the youngest championship leader, because...
After 3 races, come on.
Yes, but he's still... What I'm going to say is that it's showing his maturity, and I think that is something that is really one of his hidden strengths, if you like. Yes, he's quick in a car. Yes, he can figure it out and has learnt all the processes to drive that car. Yes, he's fortunate to have that car that is performing well and has a bit of an advantage over some of the others. But there's a maturity there. It's a confidence and a maturity that he's not... If he makes a mistake, he's not beating himself up for long periods, which is what we saw a little bit of last year when you allude to the fact that his debut season wasn't that great. I think that he was having a bit of a mental tussle with just coming to terms with Formula One. But over the winter, he seems to have knuckled down. The errors are fewer. And I do believe he is a championship contender. So I've been hugely impressed by him as an individual. And kudos to Mercedes for believing in their young driver program and sticking with it. And, you know, they've got 2 drivers in the car now with George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, and both of those have come through the program. And that should make everyone at that team feel quite proud of the achievement of what they're doing. Leading the championship, designed a good car, and they've got 2 homegrown talent driving it. So I think it's a good position at the moment for Mercedes, and certainly for Kimi Antonelli as well.
But Mark, it is a long season. I joke about how many races are left. I think we've got 19 now with the cancellation of Bahrain and Saudi. It is a lot on any driver. He is 19 years old. You tipped him to win a race in Australia, and then you went again for China. You're kind of just hedging your bets by saying the same driver every time. But you actually really rate Antonelli. Can he keep this going for the whole year? Because George Russell, and let's be honest, the Ferraris are probably in the hunt too, they are formidable opponents.
They are, but I think he can definitely keep it going. I remember around the Chinese Grand Prix when we were speaking and we said, you know, the cars are going to be unreliable and things like that. And George maybe has suffered a little bit more with that than Kimi Antonelli has, but all he can do is win the races that are in front of him. And you said there, it wasn't an easy win in Japan. He had that struggle off the start, which he's had at almost every race. Almost Lando Norris, but turbo, didn't it, from last year when we saw Lando struggle with those starts. He's clearly got a smart, mature head on those shoulders to not panic in those situations, run his own race, know that the car and the package beneath him is good enough to beat anyone else other than his teammate on their day, I guess. So you have to say at this stage, just because of how good that car is and how much better it is than the rest of the field, that he's in the title race.
Should just explain that he was on pole position. He dropped to 5th. I think even at one point he was down in 6th. And then a crash by Ollie Bearman, which we'll come on to, on lap, I think it was 22, brought out a safety car. George Russell had pitted the lap before the safety car, and Antonelli had stayed out, and Antonelli gained big time, I think it's fair to say, from the safety car. Look, I want to stay on the positives because I want to talk about Oscar Piastri, who finally not only started a race, but he ended it on the podium. Ben, have we slightly underestimated McLaren this season? Are they maybe not as bad as we expected? Or do you think Oscar Piastri just had a superb race?
No, I it bodes into what I was saying at the start of the year before we had any races, and that was that they were really quietly confident. And I think that, if anything, the first two races we saw were deeply disappointing and took me by complete surprise. So, I was convinced that they had a quick car. The two drivers, obviously, on paper, you'd say that they're probably the two strongest based on their recent performances. And so I'm not surprised by this result. I was surprised by the start they had to the year. But yeah, I mean, look, team are fully back in it now, I think. A slightly disappointing weekend for Norris, who didn't make the podium. But, if that's where you're at and you're disappointed not to be on the podium, then that shows you that you're having a good time because you're challenging for those top three places. So I think, all that early doom-mongering about McLaren is over. I think that they're looking strong and they'll finish the season strong as well.
You'll have to write a new chapter for your book, Ben. I just love a
Possibly.
plug. Yeah, well, look, my positivity is over. Let's move on to this Ollie Bearman crash that I mentioned.
We've had...
It was... No, that's it. It's over.
6 minutes.
Yeah, well, because I think we have to get into what I think overshadowed the Japanese Grand Prix personally, and that was the Ollie Bearman crash at 190 miles an hour with an impact of 50 G. It was huge. He could be seen limping away from the car. I think he is going to be incredibly sore today. We saw him in the garage after he'd been to the medical centre, and he said afterwards that once the adrenaline had started wearing off, it was starting to hurt quite a lot. Thankfully, nothing was broken. Now, this crash came about, and it is something that all of the drivers, particularly Norris actually in Australia, have warned about, and that is the speed differential. And in this case, Ollie Bearman was coming up on the back of Franco Colapinto. The difference in speed was 50 kilometres an hour. Ollie Bearman's, I think, slightly misjudged it, coupled with Colapinto drifting ever so slightly left. And that culminated in this absolutely enormous crash. The drivers, again, have been incredibly vocal after the race yesterday. Ayu Komatsu, the Haas team principal who Bearman drives for, said it could have been a lot worse. And actually, they got lucky on this occasion. But this is a serious issue. And it comes about from when people are deploying their battery versus when they're in recovery harvesting mode. Mark, I think this is really serious. I think this is something that F1 are absolutely going to have to listen to the drivers and the team principals and everyone involved in the sport on. But what can be done about this?
Yeah, I think, look, the FIA and Formula One probably had their fingers crossed for those first three races that nothing was going to happen of a serious nature. And of course, that crash is serious. That you just mentioned the numbers there, and it's shocking almost, isn't it? And it was good to see him, if not walk away, at least he got out of the car and could hobble away. But that's really not the point. The point here is that it happened in the first place. As I said then, until these cars are on the track, you can run any simulations you like and you're not going to really understand those closing speeds or anything like that. So I do have a modicum of sympathy, I guess, for F1 and the FIA, because until we got to Australia, it wasn't really obvious what the issues were going to be, as easy as it is now to say.
Do you not think that the drivers were complaining before the race? Do you not think surely F1 and the FIA are running simulations themselves about this?
Yes, but again, it must be difficult to then say real world versus simulation. As good as these simulations are these days, it is still sitting in a car and putting 22 drivers as it is now on a grid is very different to running it in a simulation. This isn't me suddenly saying everything's hunky-dory. What I think is...
You're trying to keep it positive, eh?
A little bit. No, I think there was nothing they could do in those first three races, let's be honest. Australia and China were back-to-back, and then we went almost straight into Japan. Now, has it fallen into the laps a little bit that we haven't now got a race until Miami? Definitely, even though everyone wanted to go racing in the Middle East. That was not that. If we'd have had to go, we'd have all gone and we'd have enjoyed it. We're not going for other reasons, but now they've got this big gap to Miami where, the FIA put out a statement yesterday saying, look, we're going to talk to the teams, we're going to talk to manufacturers, we're going to talk to drivers, we're going to talk to FOM. I will be shocked if we don't arrive in Miami, Bec, and there isn't some change to the regulations, some tweak that they hope will offset those speed differentials that we're seeing. Something has got to change. We know that. The drivers are the most vocal because the drivers are essentially the guys going out there putting their lives in the hands of these regulations. Ollie Bearman yesterday, it could have been a lot worse. So they will be pushing for these changes. So there will be change before Miami. I'm almost certain of that. What that looks like, I don't know. Will it solve the problem? Probably not, because can you change it that much over that course of time? Then all these other tweaks have to be made to power units and things like that. It might be that we have the course of the season to try and smooth them out gradually. But as I said, they would have 100% been watching these races, fingers crossed, hoping to get through them unscathed. Just about managed it before yesterday, but now something has to be done before we go to Miami.
I'm not sure how I feel about it. I think we've got to give it a little bit of time before we start changing the rules, don't we? We've only had 3 races.
I don't think it's about changing the rules as such, is it? It's about making sure those kind of issues, you've got to, essentially, that they've got to make sure the safety of the drivers is paramount. And I don't think we saw yesterday that isn't the case at the moment, is it? I'm not saying they set it out to look like that, but just that incident we saw yesterday proves that there are issues, there are safety concerns. So I don't think the regulations need changing en masse. I just think they've got to tweak something to try and remove those issues we saw yesterday.
I guess it's the significance of the battery, isn't it? It's you can adjust the limit on how much you harvest and deploy, but that eats into the underlying mentality of having that 50-50 split. 50% internal combustion engine, 50% electric battery power. There's no way that you can tweak the rules and change that adjustable battery element without changing that ratio as well. So I think it's a really tricky one. Yeah, look, they need to investigate and find out what happened. But for me, I think a change would be probably too soon at the moment. I just think that we've only had 3 races.
Well, good segue, Ben, because I want to move on to Max Verstappen's comments all weekend. He has made it very clear his displeasure with these new regulations. I don't think any of us particularly enjoyed watching qualifying in Suzuka. Verstappen not alone, by the way, in his dismay with these regulations. I don't want to see the drivers lifting and coasting to go faster, absolutely not. And Max Verstappen has intimated, not so thinly veiled, that he could walk away from the sport because he's not enjoying it anymore. Ben, is that a real possibility that Verstappen could walk away?
Yeah, absolutely. We spoke about our podcast on the Thursday after the media day, and the fact that he's come into that weekend and had a go at a journalist and continue to do so throughout the weekend. And then he was unhappy after qualifying. Then he's unhappy after the race. He's really not in a good space at the moment, is he? He's in a team that is in transition still after all the departures last year. And I think he is getting a little bit fed up. He's probably welcoming this break because he can go and do things that he enjoys other than Formula One. Like he does Formula One because he enjoys racing on the limit, and this current formula doesn't suit that desire and that feeling. So, I think he is very much fallen out of love with Formula One. I don't know how he gets back to it, because obviously the regulation changes. These things aren't going to go away for any amount of time. So it's a really tricky one, and I can see him walking away at the end of the season if he's had enough. He's always made it clear that if he didn't enjoy it anymore, then he'll walk away. And, I expect him to be true to his word and do so.
Yeah, you certainly wouldn't put it past him, would you? Mark, Ben was talking there about the 50-50 split. We know that the likes of Audi, Ford, they came into Formula One this season because they like the idea of these hybrid, this technology that they can put back into their road cars. So my question, and maybe it's too existential and it's not this extreme, but does Formula One now need to decide between the engine manufacturers and having the top drivers in the world within Formula One? Because it doesn't seem at the moment with these regulations that they can have both.
It's a good question, and I suppose, look, a lot of it we said about maybe, good, that's what you get paid the big bucks for. Maybe they bent over backwards a little bit, I guess, to get Ford back in, to get Honda in, to get Audi on board, to keep the others happy, I suppose. Mercedes and people like that would have been wanting these rules brought in. I don't know if it's then a payoff that you lose the best drivers, because, again, we've got to strike a balance here, haven't we? And Ben mentioned it's only been 3 races, and, And some of these drivers, Lewis Hamilton is saying it's some of the best driving of his whole career. So he's enjoying it more than he ever has done. So I think from the drivers, it's very skewed as to what car they're in and what power unit is beneath them at the moment as to whether they're enjoying it or not. That's not to say those drivers that are enjoying it haven't also acknowledged that the rules could be dangerous with what we saw in Suzuka. But yeah, if you're putting the best drivers in the world in the best car, they're going to love it. If you're putting the best drivers in the world and they're driving around at the back, look at Fernando Alonso. He's another one who's been really outspoken about it, and he's a two-time world champion who's at the moment he's pootling around at the back and he's happy to finish a Grand Prix. On the Max thing, I would say, look how old he is. He could take a 5-year F1 sabbatical for this whole regulation cycle and come back at the age of 33 and still wipe the floor with everyone. It shows his competitive nature.
That's depressing, isn't it?
I know, yeah. It just shows competitive nature, but also I think I touched on it a bit there. It's this way that you go about it, isn't it? Lewis Hamilton hated the ground effect era. Couldn't really win for toffee, but in that same time, a lot of the time, especially last year at Ferrari, he was very critical of his own driving, of his own abilities. He questioned whether he still had it at times. Whereas for Max, he's essentially gone, I don't like these rules, because I'm not being successful. So, I'm going to take my ball and go home almost. It is an issue if some of the best drivers in F1 don't like these rules. Does it just balance out over time? If Red Bull get on top of their issues, if they can push forward, if they get improvements and he's still there next year and they're winning races, will he be as vocal as he has been? It's easy to say now after 3 races, I'm going to quit Formula One. You've also got to say, well, we can't just change the rules for one man. We can't just scrap an entire rule set because, yes, he's probably he's a generational talent, Max Verstappen. No British bias here. Keep that in if we clip it up. But you can't just suddenly say he's not happy, so let's change everything to make sure he's happy. It can't work like that, can it?
But he's not alone, is he? I mean, listen to Charles Leclerc, what he's saying. You mentioned about Fernando Alonso. Okay, he's definitely not taking a 5-year sabbatical and coming back. But he's absolutely not alone. And I know what Ben's going to say, that if he was driving a car that was competitive, he'd probably be less grumpy about the whole thing. But it's not just one driver we're talking about here. I think Max Verstappen is just the person who is in a position to be able to say this because he has won 4 world championships. He does have an enormous bank balance. And he does have a new daughter. I mean, she's probably not so new anymore. I think about 9 months old or nearly a year, maybe. That he's, it does, when you have children, it does make you reassess what you're doing for a living. And actually, he's just kind of all of these elements have come together and he is speaking almost on behalf of other drivers, I would say. Whereas I would argue that the Mercedes pair, who are obviously very competitive at the front, they are perhaps more towing the corporate line. And I don't mean the Mercedes line, I mean just the kind of F1 line.
The issue you got there is George Russell is obviously, he's very much the director of the GPDA. So, which hat does he wear? Should he be the guy speaking on behalf of the drivers, or does he keep quiet because he's also in the best car that's benefiting the most from these rules? So it kind of puts George Russell between a rock and a hard place. But you mentioned drivers talking out about it. Carlos Sainz is obviously the deputy to George Russell, and he's more than happy to talk about the rules. Maybe it is too simplistic to just say if you're good in these cars, you're not going to complain, because everyone knows there are issues. I think that's blatantly or obvious to anyone watching F1 at the moment. It's not where it needs to be. But I do think the calls for quitting F1 or the calls for changing the regulations, there's a lot of area in between that, isn't there? There's a lot to say, we need to sort this out, and there's a lot to say, up here, I'm going to walk away and go and do something else. And if Max does that, then, fair play to him. And like I say, he could come back in 3 years into a Mercedes and wipe the floor with everyone still.
GT would be delighted if Max Verstappen quit F1 and went over and did that full time. You see the crowds they get, it's amazing.
Well, he would be delighted too, because he's enjoying it and it's his team. It's an investment, it's a business opportunity. Like, why would he not go and do that?
Yeah. It's a good, the coinage, yes. Well, he's got plenty of money, he doesn't need any more. I mean, he probably earns more from interest alone than we'll ever make in our lifetime. Anyway, let's move on. We are now entering the April gap, 5 weeks of no racing, which, given off the back of our conversation, a lot of people will be very happy about, others not so much. So, Mark, what happens now within this 5-week gap? We don't go racing now until Miami with the cancellation of Saudi and Bahrain. Is everyone just sat around twiddling their thumbs and sunning themselves?
The drivers might enjoy a little bit of break that they weren't expecting. But let's be honest, they're all going to be pushing to make their cars and improve these cars and give themselves a chance when they head to Miami. The teams in particular are going to be straight back in, going to be working in the factories. There's going to be no break or no let off for them. It's not like the summer break where the factories have to be shut down. This is a great chance for teams that were struggling and power unit manufacturers that were struggling to really try and get on top of these regulations. Now, the issue they might have is there might be tweaks to those regulations coming, and we don't know when between now and Miami. It might be announced tomorrow. It might be announced the week that everyone starts heading to America. So that is something of an unknown and something everyone will have to keep an eye on. But I suppose in a weird way, it couldn't really come at a better time for a lot of these teams. You think of Aston Martin, would they have learnt more going to Bahrain and Saudi, or can they learn more by properly going through those 3 races they've had, or that data they've had, putting proper change into the Honda power unit, the car itself? Obviously, I think that's beneficial. Maybe the same for Cadillac, maybe the same for Williams. But then you look at a Mercedes, and we spoke before, didn't we, about this change before after the Canadian Grand Prix. Well, they've lost 2 races now of their potential dominance. McLaren, Ben mentioned they're on the way back up. They seem ready to fight Ferrari for that 2nd place. Would they have preferred 2 more races? Almost certainly. Also, all those partners out in the Middle East, there have been a lot of activations taking place. There's a lot of money flowing into the sport from out there that now doesn't really have an outlet until we go back in November. So there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of people that will be pleased that they can focus on factory work and do what needs to be done there. But there'll also be the other half of the field, the other end of the spectrum, if you like, that just want to go racing as much as possible at the moment.
I thought it was interesting yesterday during the race, Alex Albon for Williams, I think he pitted about 6 or 7 times, and Williams basically just admitted that it had become a bit of a test for them. Obviously, Williams not where they would like to be, absolutely down on where they were certainly last year. And Ben, I think for teams like Williams, they will actually massively miss out on track time. Like you mentioned, Mark, earlier, there's only so much you can get from a simulation. Unless you're on track, it's a huge amount of time that's being lost, isn't it, Ben?
Yeah, it is. They did that virtual test, didn't they, when they couldn't make the Barcelona test at the start of the year. So there might be a few of those things going on, but you can't replicate real time and the running that you experience on a track with your competitors around. So, a bit of a blow for Williams, I think. The flip side, of course, is the fact that that car is overweight, so it allows them some time to dive into that and shed some kilos off it. So, I think all these teams will be knuckling down over the winter. Over the winter? I think these teams will all be knuckling down over this spring break to refine their packages.
Right, well, Williams is going on a diet and Ben is going for a nap. We will...
I know what's happened, and that is I haven't had a coffee yet this morning, so I need to get up to speed.
It's nearly 10 a.m. What's wrong with you? You should have got up earlier.
I know.
Right, I have no sympathy for you, as ever. We are not taking a break. You will absolutely hear from us. As I mentioned in a previous podcast, we have some special episodes coming at you. We look forward to sharing more about them once they are ready to come out. There's going to be a lot of news out of Formula One, I think, over the next 5 weeks, as Mark mentioned, with the regulations, and I think there will be tweaks. They have already said that they would look at them again after 3 weeks, and I think Japan has made that absolutely a cert now. And of course, we will be in Miami, won't we, Mark?
Ciao, looking forward to it.
Yep, we will be at the next race. Didn't think I'd be saying that after Japan. But in the meantime, if you want to contact us, and I have to say an enormous thank you to everybody who has sent in comments around us talking about Max Verstappen ejecting Giles Richards from The Guardian from his media session on Thursday. A lot of people agreed, a lot of people disagreed. A big thank you that actually it didn't get rude and everyone made their point without being very social media about it, let's say. But really enjoyed reading them all. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I think one of the podcasts that we'll do another Q&A that seems to have been well received, which is great. And we'll also pick up on a few of those comments that were made because, yes, I thoroughly enjoyed reading them and we do love it when you contact us. So thank you very much. But as I say, we'll be back. Don't worry, you will hear from us. We'll be around. I know you miss us otherwise. But until then, we will speak to you later. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.